With this, we shall move on to our next session. Biographies have their own charm, don't they? Writing a biography is an art that is mastered by only a handful. In this session, our speakers will discuss if biographies are literature or PR. I would like to call on stage the director of Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation, Mr. Anirban Ganguly, columnist Gautam Chintamani, authors Manu S Pillai and Prabeen Singh to stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Anirban Ganguly, Gautam Chintamani, Manu S Pillai, and Prabeen Singh. This session is for 45 minutes, so I'll request the speakers and the chairman to kindly take a note of the time. And I'll request Madam Singh to kindly start this session, please.
Look up, are we?
Can we start? Is this on?
Yes.
We're going to try to change the format of this discussion, which is going to be more a discussion among us, which hopefully the participants, are also going to be able to participate effectively, in the sense that any of you at any time while we are talking wants to raise a question, please raise your hand, because we need to identify you, not that it's a classroom, and you're most welcome to join us. Okay? Tell me a story. Please tell me a story. Is what a little child who's just learned how to talk asks of his grandmother, like we had this charming young man, Mr. Dubey, telling us yesterday, or any of us, and it moves from the grandmother to the mother and father and everyone else. And the story becomes so integral in that little child's fantasy, learning of a vocabulary, imagination, influences in later years of his life, where if a story is fast forwarded by a parent because of shortage of time, immediately the child picks it up and says, you didn't tell us that. You forgot to tell us that Sita followed Ram. So you have to go back to that story over and over again. That story, that need to look into somebody else's life, that need which all of us have, which can be defined as curiosity, inquisitiveness, voyeurism, is what holds us all together very largely, where we need to be peeping toms. And so when does this peeping tom and this story get defined and more formalized into a larger concept of biography? Was the earliest storytelling 5,000 years ago in cave paintings, was that the first biography? Was the first biography written in Sanskrit by Bani Bhatta on Harshvardhan the Raja, which was just 8 chapters? Was that a biography which we began with? Was the biography of Adi Shankaran and his travels and his discourses with other philosophers around India and other parts, was that going to be called a biography? was the biography which was under the patronage of a Maharaja, a ruler, a man of wealth, which got scribes to document their lives, sometimes pictorially, so the biography became larger, like we see in Akbarnama and Babarnama, albeit they say it's Babur's own story, but obviously it was written by others involved in it. And in those, they are also portraits. There's chapters and chapters on daily life. But can you really define that as a complete biography? Can you define all the endless books we have on Mr. Gandhi, who we call our Mahatma now, as biography? Or do all of us, somewhere in the peeping Tom in us, miss the flesh and blood of these people? Where are the real people in all this? What were their loves, their lives, their biases, their non-eulogized sides? What were they like, which also defined them as people who impacted, some of them largely on our lives, some of them changed the world histories? What were those like? Or does that get relegated to the areas of psychoanalyst and that science? Or are today, what we define as biographies today, are they relevant? Because today, like the medical practices, biographers have also become specialists. So you have political biographies, you have cultural biographies, you have a biography which is larger, which you can call a city biography, a time of a period with focuses on certain key figures during that time as biography. So what is a biography? And how subjective or objective are biographies? If you look at the larger concept, is biography pure literature? Or does biography go into branding, propaganda, bringing your own need to create a hero and promote that hero as the hero of the masses, hero of the people? How does that work? So for that, we really have to go back to sources. How objective are sources? For instance, Alexander is one of the great heroes who's been written over and over again. And his major biographer or documenter of that time were Aristobulus. And Aristobulus were very kind to Alexander and did not really talk about Alexander's drunken orgies, Alexander's fiery temper, which condemned people to be hung and, whatever way they killed people those days. He brought the softer side of Alexander, because for him, like for us in later biographies, a hero is far more important than the true blood and flesh of that person. But those become resource materials for people to begin their biography from. So these are some of the subjects we're going to talk about. And now I invite the biographers here to, in a very short, maybe 3 minutes each, to talk about what got them to write on particular subjects, or a time, or a thing. And then we're going to open it to a discussion.
Thank you. It's a wonderful feeling to be here since yesterday, and I thank Prabhuji for remembering to invite a non-biographist like me to this. I think I'm the only odd man.
Me also. It's a memory, not a
you
biography.
You are a legendary figure in any case. What I'll do is thank you so much for this setting this the theme and the spirit, really. I just share a few thoughts. I'll not make it very structured. While preparing for this session, there are two wonderful things that came to my mind. They were there in my box. So I just want to share that with the august audience here. When Sri Aurobindo was approached by someone for writing, they wanted to write his biography, he said, "No one can write about my life because it has not been on the surface for men to see." And on another occasion, he said, when he was requested to give his consent to a disciple for helping a writer of his biography, he wrote in his inimitable way, "I do not want to be murdered by my own disciple in cold print." And there's another very interesting, and I'll say why I'm saying this. When Anand Kumaraswamy, who by the way has no biographer as yet, except Durai Raj Singham, who's written a biography of his, when Durai Raj Singham approached Anand Kumaraswamy for a biography, and this is what he wrote: I must explain that I am not interested in biographical matter relating to myself, and that I consider the modern practice of publishing details about the lives and personalities of well-known men is nothing but a vulgar catering to illegitimate curiosity. So I could not think of spending my time, which is very occupied with more important tasks, in hunting up such matter, most of which I have long forgotten. And I shall be grateful if you will publish nothing but the barest facts about myself. What you should deal with is the nature and tendency of my work, and your book should be 95% of this. I wish to remain in the background and shall not be grateful or flattered by any details about myself or my life. All that is anicca, and as the wisdom of India should have taught you, portraiture of human beings is aswargiya. All this is not a matter of modesty, but one of principle. I've taken a lot of time already, but why I'm saying is this, that the Indian practice of writing biographies did not exist as such. But across the ages, you had thinkers, you had observers who came up with biographies. For example, Muni Bagchi's spiritual biography of Swami Abhedananda. Who remembers that? But it's a classic example of a spiritual approach to biography. Liselle Raymond's biography of Sister Nivedita in 1953, that's the first time after Nivedita's passing in 1911 that a biography was, one came up with a biography. So, as we were discussing this morning, there are genres of biographies, some that are yet to be written. Master Tara Singh, for example, has no biography as yet. Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee is still awaiting a biographer if you leave aside Balraj Madhok, which was largely an approach because Madhok was himself so involved with Shama Prasad Mukherjee. So it was not objective in that sense. And so what I'm trying to say is that in the Indian context, intellectual biography and spiritual biography, and biographies of revolutionaries, the unsung heroes, these three genres are those in which a lot of work needs to be done. So I'll just now, one can keep, otherwise I can go on.
We'll take it forward in the discussion.
In the discussion, yeah.
Well, talking about biographies, writing about a character like Rajesh Khanna is something which many people don't expect to do because, these people, actors and filmmakers of that era, never took their work so seriously that one could write about that. Of course, you can write about the making of a film or you can write about a life, but to look at somebody like Rajesh Khanna who's largely seen in a context of just 3 years of superstardom and redefining how stardom was measured becomes a very important aspect. But there's a lot more to Rajesh Khanna than 1969 and 73, his films, because he was one of the busiest stars in the 80s, and the way he came about to films. It's not like we haven't had larger-than-life film stars before Mr. Khanna. There was Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor, Devanand, the second rung of stars, which I call them as Rajendra Kumar, Manoj Kumar, Sunil Dutt. And before that, there was Ashok Kumar, there were K.L. Sehgal, Kanan Devi, Devika Rani. So you've had these people who are bigger than what they do. They're bigger than the medium. Perhaps that's why nobody ever thought of writing or putting them in the context of their time. You would write about Sehgal and you would write that he was blessed with a voice from the gods himself, or you would write about Kanan Devi and you would eulogize the way she could sing, or she could get Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore's songs and put them in a film and make it very massy in that sense. So to write about a personality like Rajesh Khanna, like Prabeenji was saying, is also to write about the era. Of course, it's very difficult to be objective because, when you write on a particular personality, you're either writing because you like the personality or you're writing because you want to be critical of the personality. Rajesh Khanna, for all his superstardom, and all the extreme reactions that he generates. Either people love him and praise him to the skies, or treat him like a guy who really lost his mind after, attaining the kind of success that he had. And to put Rajesh Khanna in the context of this day and age, you have to say that imagine the 4 Beatles, put them into one guy with a little bit of Elvis Presley, put a dash of the aura of James Dean, and then you might perhaps come close to the kind of stardom that he enjoyed. Everybody knows that. But to look at him in the context of India and popular Hindi cinema, I mean, you're looking at a guy who came about in the mid-60s. This is about after the Chinese War. This is after, 15, 16 years of independence and the Nehruvian dream kind of going through a metamorphosis of sorts, where you're questioning everything about yourself, whether you did the right thing, whether your policies were right or not. And at that point, there comes this hero who's, kind of like the first brand to be built. He wins a talent contest. He's designed to be a hero, to be a leading man, and then he becomes a superstar. So you're also talking about the kind of era that we were living in. And now, because documentation of films or popular cinema has become more popular now in an Indian context, you have a certain sense of historian's fallacy and a presentism that you have to avoid. Because now when you look back and you look at Rajesh Khanna and you hear all those kind of stories that he was perhaps physically abusing his wife, he was not kind to upstarts like Amitabh Bachchan around him, he was, very dismissive of people who didn't agree with him in his darbar and all. How do you not keep this in mind while writing about him before all these things happened? So biographies in that sense, in Rajesh Khanna's case, they can't be loosely termed as a PR activity, because these were the stars who were very, very guarded about their lives. They never did interviews, they never did advertisements, they never endorsed products, they were not cutting ribbons at places or dancing at weddings. So they liked to keep away from, the fans and people. And once upon a time when the film would release, they would have their posters there and people would really eulogize them. So they would have, if Rajesh, I started writing the book after he passed away. If he were alive, perhaps he would have really played with my mind and I would have ended up writing something else, because he came from an era where you didn't look at biographies with the kind of openness that perhaps today's stars would. So it's a double-edged sword, biography, but it's also, if you look at the time that the context that you're putting your subject in, then perhaps I feel that it goes beyond PR or it goes beyond a hagiography and can become a document. I won't say an important document, but a document to some extent to understand that time.
Thank you. I think I look at biographies also in the sense of what kind of purpose the very exercise brings to the table. It's a little bit of a cliche in India to talk about how this country is a land of so many stories and so on. But we do like heroes, we do like tall, towering figures, we like knights in shining armors and so on. Look at the way we admired Mr. Modi, in the sense of, the way he sort of swept everybody off their feet as a leader. Before that, there was an Indira Gandhi. Everyone is fascinated by these tall, very compelling leaders and their tales. So we like having heroes, we like having people who tell magnificent, dazzling stories and seem like they belong in the realm of mythology and, something that is beyond humans. So the role of a biographer, especially a historical biographer, which is what my book essentially attempts, is also to deconstruct the idea of the hero. A hero belongs in a certain context, in a certain age, but I think it's also essential that we learn how to deconstruct that and find the man or the woman at the bottom of that story. We cut away all the flesh and reach the bone, because that will teach us so much more. That will put so many things more into perspective. It will tell us how decisions were taken. Often one would be surprised to find the way in which decisions are actually taken. Now, speaking of history, in my book there is a character, 17th century queen in Kerala. Now this is a matrilineal system where the women have the upper hand and the men are essentially lower. So back in the day, the queens could have more than one husband if they wanted. The husbands could not sit in the presence of their wives. The husbands had to refer to their wives as highnesses, never by name. If they went out somewhere, the husbands couldn't go in the same car. They had to follow in another car. They had to bow to their children and their wives. At feasts in the palace, the wife would have 4 kinds of dessert. The husband would get 2. In every sense, the husband's status was below the wife. Now, in the 17th century, there was a queen to whom the English sent like an ambassador. And, if you look at a lot of the Indian resources, the poetry that existed at the time, she's painted as this wonderful, very paragon of piety and virtue and all of that. And these were all written much later. But if you look at the actual records that the English kept at that time, their records say that they sent a beautiful Englishman to the Queen's harem and that he stayed there for a good 3 months or something. And, one of the return gifts he got for spending his time with the Queen was the fort of Anjengo, which was one of the earliest forts the English ever had in this country. So you discover that if you go beyond the mythology of a human being and you actually find out a lot about their personal lives and what they were doing and what they were thinking and how they were behaving, you find that decisions were often taken on completely subjective basis. Decisions were taken not in boardrooms and cabinet rooms. We know how Nixon and Indira Gandhi hated each other, where she basically went and sat in the Oval Office and refused to say anything. So he was just talking to a blank face, and all she would do is smile a little, nod a little, because she did not like him. And that obviously had a bearing on how our foreign policy played out with the United States during those years. So I think the role of a biographer is also to deconstruct legend, to deconstruct mythologies we build up. Human beings need mythology because we sort of nourish our minds and nourish our intellects with wonderful stories that inspire and encourage and, teach our kids something or the other. And it's like they say, you campaign in poetry, but you have to govern in prose. So once the mythology is done in poetry and Sanskrit and wonderful stories, at the end of the day, when we're looking back at history especially, when you're looking back at a life after, say, 20, 30, 40 years, do you want to stick to the mythology you've been fed all your life, or do you want to go into why that mythology was built, how it was constructed, who wrote those poems, why did they write those poems, how they were deployed, and so on and so forth. So I think that is my attitude towards writing biographies in general, and since that brings in the whole PR angle as well, which is that often, while a person is alive, that person is an institution as opposed to a human being. But once that person's gone, I think subsequent generations have every prerogative to deconstruct them and go back and discover the human being as opposed to continuing with the myth and the mythological being we have been fed. Yeah.
So as time is short, and if all 3 of you agree to this, let's pick up from what Manu has just said. Because what is then the role of a biographer? I mean, are we still going to hide behind safe subjects and say that we are writing a political biography, we are writing a spiritual biography, but where does the politics of that man come from? Where does the spirituality come from? What Manu has said is that the biographer, major responsibility is bringing to the biography the real man or the real woman. What were they? Were they any different to us? How do we identify ourselves? Do we still want our heroes to be perpetuated over and over again? Or would we like to really identify with them? So should we take it from what Manu said? Because I think that's a nice point since time is short.
Just about to point that out. Manu is absolutely right. I think in our age, the genre of biographies should be that deconstructing and not that myth making, because that had a role during a period, and especially for the courtiers or the court biographers. Or, for example, Mani Shankar Mukherjee's biography of Swami Vivekananda, The Monk as Man. That's something so fascinating and moving, because he absolutely gets into the personality, Swamiji's health problems, the way he performed in school, the litigations that he had to face during his entire lifetime and till about a week before he passed away. This is something these are examples which he gave and weaved it in such a narrative that was so moving. And one can't forget it. So you're absolutely right, and I agree on that. We need to really look at these biographies. And this has not been sufficiently done in terms of our personalities. Amongst certain personalities, you see that there's a reluctance to be talked about, like I cited. But that But that aside, this reluctance to be cited or talked about put a kind of a blanket on their entire career.
It's like a self-censorship. I mean,
Exactly.
why are we self-censoring ourselves?
So there should have been people who would have taken these up. In fact, I just want to give one example because we are in Odisha and I referred to this in the morning. Jatindranath Mukherjee and the Battle of Balasore. Jatindranath Mukherjee didn't have a biographer till one of his grandsons, did his PhD under Raymond Aron. Samuel is here. It was Raymond Aron who accepted Prithvindra Mukherjee's thesis to do a biography on the early Indian revolutionaries. And Prithvindra Mukherjee entirely then put forward, based on primary sources, Jatindranath Mukherjee's life. So it's very fascinating that you had to have a leading French social scientist and philosopher who accepted to take on an Indian in order to bring out an authentic biography of an Indian revolutionary, pre-Gandhian. So I agree, absolutely.
I think taking from, what Manu just said, deconstructing, there are three things which are very, very big in India: cricket, politics, and films. So I'll talk about cricket and films a little bit because, see, most of film writing in India, at least in the past, used to be, film magazines. And the idea behind a film magazine somewhere was also to sell the film star. Circulation and sell the film star. So the myth building happened right there and then. I mean, the stories of Raj Kapoor's wife at the mandap looking at Ashok Kumar because she was such a big fan. I mean, before the Sehra or whatever, the ceremony was still going on, somebody said Ashok Kumar is here. So she left her own shadi to look there. Even in Rajesh Khanna's case, he became such a big star that when he went for a cousin's barat, everybody left the doula on the ghodi and went after Rajesh Khanna. So that's the kind of popularity that these guys have. So the hero or the myth building is inherent in them. And I found that if you just generally try and speak to people who worked with these guys or who were related to them, and after a little while, the general talk about them automatically starts the whole process of bursting that myth or, deconstructing the myth inherently. So I don't think that film journalism or writing on cinema or that time, even look at cricket. I mean, you don't want to look at cricketers beyond a certain mold that you put them in. It's only that one Mike Burley will be talked about from a captain point of view and nobody else will be spoken. So this hero building is an inbuilt thing. So if a biographer comes from outside that field, then somewhere, because I was not a film journalist, I grew up watching films and I started making documentaries and all. So my approach of looking at Rajesh Khanna or looking at somebody from that period was slightly different. So that helped me to break the myth. But if you just generally start talking about them, or if you look at them from a very, very regular perspective, which film journalism didn't allow at that time, then somewhere you can break this myth. And most of these guys, the older stars, some of them actually deconstructed themselves very well. Like I keep going back to Kanan Devi because she wrote her own autobiography, and two of them. And in fact, she spoke about her life at large. And it's only after, some 40 years of her autobiography that there was a biography which came out. And, this year is the 100th year of the centenary year of Kanan Devi. And there are only 4 books on her. 3 of them have been written by her. So somewhere you don't want to look at your own heroes beyond a certain, myth. And then if you do that, then the deconstruction is a very organic thing and it can happen organically.
I think there's one of the reasons is also because there's so much at stake with all these myths that are constructed. For example, one prime example is Jayalalitha, who I think in the 80s she used to write a serialized account of her own life, like a semi-autobiography really, but it used to appear in a magazine every few weeks or every month or something like that. And she was fairly honest in that about how she fell in love with some actor and how she was bowled over by somebody else and how she was, she was the receiving end of a lot of flack for all sorts of things. A rather bold thing to be doing, and she was always a very bold person in the 1970s and 80s. But the moment she became MGR's successor and the leader of a party, all of that essentially came back to bite her because suddenly her opponents were deploying her own words against her. The result was what? Jayalalitha went back, literally with that bulletproof vest and all of that. She became inaccessible. She started hating the press because transparency, it's very easy to say that intellectually, but once you're in the business, once you are a Rajesh Khanna, once you are a Tendulkar or a big political leader, there's so much at stake in your mythology. It's an investment. You've created your myth, you've erected walls, you've raised this ivory tower and parked yourself in it, and then you can't quite jump out of it because suddenly you're stuck. You can't really move out of the realm of mythology that easily.
But Manu, and all three of you actually, it does get important for public figures in any field to create a myth, because they've done, especially in today's marketing strategies, they become brands. So they will hide their privacy, they will hide their warts, they will hide a lot. But what is the real role of a biographer? Do they feed into that? And can they really be called biographers if they feed into it? Or do they become documenters and not biographers? So what is the role? I mean, isn't the role of a biographer really somebody who looks at the subject under discussion in all their various personality and facets, their vulnerability, their strengths, linked to a larger context of the world outside and what influenced them? Like, for instance, the other day I was very surprised to read, and I know that Mahatma Gandhi has mentioned it very sketchily in one of his own books, that as a child, his mother used to go to this one particular temple in Porbandar, where the Quran and the Gita were both worshipped, where they read the text of both. But how come none of his biographers, and obviously as a child, if that was his first nascent understanding of a larger concept of philosophy or religion or whatever, surely at some point that might have influenced his understanding and perceptions when he grew up, and somewhere that voice must have been something which triggered up later on when he talks about tolerance, etc., etc. But why hasn't anybody picked that up? Why is it that certain biases of a biographer, and I'm not saying that biographers have to be larger human beings or something, but why is there some kind of a quietness at certain areas? What makes us all be quiet?
Because we're a land of holy cows. We don't need an excuse to turn a historical figure or a political leader into a holy cow and then start worshipping them. And the thing is, again, it's one of those spirals. Once you start worshipping something, it's very difficult to stop worshipping them. And, Gandhiji, in many ways, I suppose now there is renewed interest, and that is why people are beginning to be a little more objective. And I think the fundamental lesson is that having those warts, having those human weaknesses is not a bad thing. My argument would be that great men need not be gods. Great men are great men, which means they're human, which means they have those flaws, which means they have those warts, they have prejudices, they have weaknesses, and we must learn to embrace that. It doesn't matter. What they did in their personal lives was their personal life, and that's fine. Nobody's making a value judgment. What we're saying is, we want them to come into the realm of humanity and not be gods. No more holy cows.
I'll get both of you to react to it for a short time, and then we'll leave it to the...
Yes, I was referring to this practice which has started some time back, authorized biography.
Yeah.
So you suddenly had an authorized biography of Jyoti Basu written by Surabhi Banerjee, who later on went to be Vice Chancellor of an university. So I think authorized biographies are a genre that we should really stay away from.
As unauthorized biography, because like Rekha's biography, for instance.
I think we should go on with unauthorized biographies, because then you can discuss threadbare, and there's no contract that the author has signed with the subject. But absolutely, I mean, personalities, unless you discuss, as you very rightly said, unless you discuss your subject in the context of that time and of the larger global scenario, it just doesn't make fun reading it. Unless you discuss your subject threadbare, there's no fun reading it. But at the same time, I think I've seen this. There are biographers who have discussed their subjects threadbare, and at the same time been able to make an elevating narrative. So at the end of it, you say, wow, here is someone. in spite of not being made out into a hero.
No, I think I agree with both Manu and Anirban here. As long as you're not judging,
Yes.
and I'm not saying that a biographer is not free to judge. He or she has every right to judge something because that's your perspective also. So you're juxtaposing your subject, your personal views, and the larger time and era that you're talking about. But I think as long as a biographer does not judge and present facts or what we believe to be facts, I think it works because in my personal experience, I've written 2 books. One was about a person and one was about a film in which many personalities came together. And it's very interesting to know that while writing on a film like Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, which is 28 years old now, everybody said the same thing. So one would automatically assume that they are speaking the truth because nobody has a different version. But at the same time, versions may differ. Like in Rajesh Khanna's case, I've mentioned, because somebody told me that, this whole relationship that he had with Akshay Kumar, where Akshay Kumar was the savior, he, bailed Rajesh Khanna out on many occasions, are all lies. They're PR machinery created by Akshay Kumar, and I go to the extent of writing that, and I never got a call from Akshay Kumar's office, or I never got, I was never threatened to be sued by anybody. I talk about the physical abuse that he may or may not have inflicted upon Dimple. I think at the end of the day, it's how you say what you want to say. If you're judging, then you are opening up a Pandora's box. But if you're putting something out there, which could be something which goes against the personality of the character as well, it works. I don't think there's a problem. I think deconstruction starts with just putting the facts out there.
And I'm going to conclude our sessions today by just a very amusing thing which just dawned on me, that earlier they were patrons, today they're publishers. So I would really hope every biographer to find an independent publisher who's not scared of, that particular biography and that particular focus. On that note, I'm going to open it for questions. I'm sorry, I can't see. Yes. Could you switch off some of those lights, please? No, I don't think they're necessary.
Good afternoon to all the panelists sitting there. My question is to Gautam sir. Sir, the first question is on your book, Rajesh Khanna. I have bought that book previous year. Sir, my question is, why did you choose only Rajesh Khanna? Apart from that, he was a busiest person in the 70s or 60s. There are many personality like you can say Amitabh Bachchan is there, Vijayanti Mala, Yash Chopra. Why only Subhash Ghai? Why only Rajesh Khanna? Well, apart from the reason that he was the busiest person, girls was admired to him. Apart from these reasons.
No, I think Vaijayanti Malaji has written her own autobiography. There's a lot written about Mr. Bachchan. And I think Subhash Ghai has been discussed a lot. Rajesh Khanna, beyond ye jo aap keh rahe hain ki, he's a superstar in those 3-4 years, there is a lot to him beyond that, So the major chunk of the book is about the kind of films that he did post the superstardom, and how do you put him in that context? For me, I think Rajesh Khanna, in the context of Hindi cinema, gives you a very nice before and after kind of a space. Before him, there's a certain style of acting, and after him, there's a certain kind of personalities. He takes something from the older generation. Sorry?
The first phenomenon we had.
That's a term which can be debated.
Apart from Rajesh Khanna, there was Prithviraj Kapoor sir also.
Okay, now we're not getting into a further discussion.
No, I think he makes a fascinating, he makes a very fascinating character to speak about. That's why perhaps I chose him.
Now let's be democratic. Excuse me. Let's be democratic.
We can talk about this later. We can talk about this later. Let's get some more questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question, please, because you've got only 2 minutes left.
Yeah, my question to someone. Actually, while we are talking about this spiritual and intellectual biography, I am wanting to just to add one thing. Suppose an autobiography, something unparalleled like a autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. So another thing, suppose the political biography of within India, that is Echoes from Andaman by Bir Savarkar. And another interesting story, that is when somebody reads that will be transported from this mundane to sublime. That is Lotus Eaters of Himalayas. I'm actually, I'm not getting that book. So my request that whenever you people are writing a lot of things about biography, we are all very legendary figures in that. So that let a book like that is Lotus Eaters of Himalayas, can it be again printed? So that the modern generation can get the very intrinsic values of the Indian culture. The very intrinsic of the Indianness is there. So my
Thank you very
in
much.
fact,
That's a great point to be taken. Let's go to the next question.
I just want to make a, can I
please.
make, I just wanted to, I wanted to make that point. You see, a number of biographies are out of print. They need to be very consciously reprinted. Number of biographies are not translated in other Indian languages. For example, Shankari Prasad Basu's Vivekananda Shramokalin Bharat Borsho. It is not there in Hindi, it's not there in English, it's not there in other languages. A seminal work. Savarkar's letters from Andaman themselves can form a political intellectual biography, which need to be, so absolutely, I agree.
We've got place for one more question.
Yes, ma'am. One last question.
That one there. I mean, let's take one central. We've done both the... Yeah, yes. Yes. There's one.
You are right of center. You are right of center. No, you remain right.
Hello. I don't know if it falls under being biased or judgmental, but when you are writing a biography, how do you, we know what the person has done. We want to know how. So how do you not eulogize him too much and not criticize him too much at the same time? Where do you draw the line? So how do you go about it?
I don't think there's a line to be drawn with criticism. Criticism is not a bad word. It's called critical thinking. It's the way you think, which is that anything you are told, you shouldn't take it as it is. It's always worthwhile asking the question, why, how, or, can this have been done some other way, or is there another explanation for this? I think once you start asking that question, it becomes easier to draw that line, because all you're doing is you're asking logical questions, and then a lot of the excess adipose on a personality falls to the side, and then you see the actual figure of the person, which may or may not be pretty. But it may be fascinatingly beautiful, it may be, completely normal, it may be hideously ugly. The point is, you have to make the effort. So the biographer is not really making a value judgment, the biographer is just asking the questions. And there, of course, the biographer has a responsibility to make sure that you try as far as possible to keep your prejudices out of the, behind the line.
Yes.
And to the extent possible. It's not completely possible to be objective, but you make an effort.
So should we or should we not expect bits and pieces of the biographer in the biography?
Oh, always.
Yes.
Question the biographer also.
You must question the biographer.
Okay. Ma'am, my question was very simple. Actually, before when I raised my hand, you had already started answering that one. Are biographers honest? And ma'am, I would like to read out 2 lines. Tight-lipped I remain, words remain stifled, not for my will or short of words, but lack of readers who shy from truths.
I think that's
Does the biographer suffer from that?
I think that's a very good note to end the session on. Thank you very much for concluding it for us.
Madam, excuse me. How can a biographer, madam, how can a biographer do, sir, Ganguly ji, how can a biographer do justice for a par excellence a person, spiritual thinker like Sri Aurobindo, as you cited earlier?
It's very difficult to do justice to Sri Aurobindo. Because he says his life has not been on the surface for people to see. And it has been a multi-layered. So, in fact, in one biography, there can be dimensions of biographies of Sri Aurobindo. But the standard thing is to keep aside your prejudice while writing about any personality. And for that, I would recommend you read Rajmohan Gandhi's Patel, A Life. How he has he's weaved into the entire thing and at the same time maintained an objectivity and written perhaps the best biography of Patel to be ever written. So,
Thank you very much for the thoughtful questions, and thank you to the panel for the insightful session. I now request Mr. Chawla to kindly present small tokens of appreciation and gratitude to the panelists.
Thank you very much.
While one school of thoughts will call biographies literature, the other might call them PR. But the fact still remains the same, that we all love reading biographies, not just for sheer reading pleasure, but also because they take us closer to the legends, the celebrities we've always loved and admired. Thank you once again to all speakers. Thank you, sir, for doing the honors.